Bryce was standing all by himself across the room, and every time I happened to look his way, he was staring at me. Finally, I completely turned my back on him and said to my father, "So, who's trying to invent a perpetual motion machine, anyway?" My father laughed. "Mad scientists all over the world." "Really?" "Yes, for hundreds of years." "Well, what they do? What's one look like?" It wasn't long before Chet was in on the discussion, and just as I was finally starting to catch on to magnetism, gyroscopic particles, and zero-point energy, I felt someone standing behind me. It was Bryce. I could feel my cheeks flush with anger. Couldn't he see I wanted to be left alone? I took a step away from him, but what that did was open up the group and allow him to move forward. Now he was standing in our circle listening to our discussion. Well, surely he was not interested in perpetual motion. I barely was myself. So I reasoned. Continuing our discussion would drive him away. I dove back in, and when the conversation started to peter out, I came up with my own ideas on perpetual motion machines. I was like a perpetual idea machine, spinning ridiculous suggestions right out of the air. And still he wouldn't leave. He didn't say anything. He just stood there listening. Then, when Mrs. Lusky announced that dinner was ready, Bryce held my arm and whispered, "Julie, I'm sorry. I've never been so sorry about anything in my whole life. You're right, I was a jerk, and I'm sorry." I yanked my arm free from his grasp and said, "It seems to me you've been sorry about a whole lot of things lately," and left him there with his apology hanging wounded in the air. It didn't take me long to realize that I'd made a mistake. I should have let him say he was sorry and then simply continued to ignore him. But I'd snapped at him in the middle of an apology, which somehow made me the rude one. He sneaked I sneaked a peek at him across the table, but he was watching his dad, who was asking my brothers about graduating and their plans for college. I had, of course, seen Mr. Lusky many times, but usually from distance. Still, it seemed impossible that I'd never noticed his eyes before. They were blue, brilliant blue. And although Mr. Lusky's were set farther back and were hidden somewhat by his eyebrows and cheekbones, there was no mistaking where Bryce had gotten his eyes. His hair was black too, like Bryce's, and his teeth were white and straight. Even though Chet had called Bryce the spitting image of his father, I'd never really thought of them as looking alike. But now I saw that they did look alike. Though where his dad seemed kind of smug, Bryce seemed, well, right now he seemed angry. Then, from the other side of the table, I heard, "Your sarcasm is not appreciated, Dad." Mrs. Lusky gave a small gasp, and everyone looked at Lunetta. "Well, it's not," she said. In all the years we've lived across the street from the Luskys, I've said about 10 words to Lunetta, and she says fewer back. To me, she's scary, so it wasn't a surprise to see her glaring at her father. But it was uncomfortable. Mrs. Lusky was keeping a smile perched on her face, but she was blinking a lot, glancing nervously around the table. I looked from one person to the next two, wondering if dinner at the Luskys was always this tense. Suddenly Lunetta got up and dashed down the hall, but she was back in a flash with a CD in her hand, and when she put it in the player, I recognized one of my brother's songs blaring through the speakers. We'd heard this song, "Candle Eyes," pouring out of my brother's bathroom at least a million times, so we were used to it. But I looked over at my mom, worried that she might be embarrassed by the distorting guitars and the greedy lyrics. This was definitely not caviar music. She seemed a little uncertain, but in a happy way. She was sharing secret smiles with my father, and honestly, I think she even giggled. My dad was looking amused, although he was very reversed about it, and it took me until the end of the song to realize that he was proud. Proud that this noise came from his voice. That surprised me. Dad has never been real big on any rendition of my brother's band, although he's never really criticized criticized it either. But then Mr. Lusky started grilling Matt and Mike about how they'd afforded to record their own music, and they explained about working and saving and shopping for good deals on equipment. And that's when I realized why my father was proud. My brothers were feeling pretty good too, you could tell. And it was no wonder, with the way Lunetta was carrying on about how great Catalyze was. She was positively gushing, which seemed very odd, coming from Lunetta. As I looked around, it struck me that we were having dinner with a group of strangers. We'd lived across the street for years, but I didn't know these people at all. Lunetta didn't know how to smile. Mr. Lusty was clean and smooth on the outside, but there was a distinct whiff of something rotten buried just beneath the surface. And the ever-efficient Mrs. Lusky seemed flustered, almost hyper. Was it having us over that was making her nervous? Then there was Bryce, the most disturbing of all because I had to admit that I didn't really know him either. And based on what I'd discovered lately, I didn't care to know anymore. Looking across the table at him, all I got was a strange, detached, neutral feeling. No fireworks, no leftover anger or resourcing flutters. Nothing. After we'd had dessert and it was time to go, I went up to Bryce and told him I was sorry for having been so fierce when we'd first come in. I should have let you apologize, and really, it was very nice of your family to have us over. I know it was a lot of work and well, I think my mom had a really good time and that's what matters to me. We were looking right at each other, but it was almost as though he didn't hear me. Bryce, I said I'm sorry. He nodded, and then our families were waving goodbye and saying goodnight. I walked behind my mother, who was holding hands with my father, and beside my brothers, who were carrying home what was left of our pies. We all wound up in the kitchen, and Matt poured himself a glass of milk and said to mine, "That Mr. Lusky was sniffing us out pretty good tonight, wasn't he? No kidding. Maybe he thinks we're hot for his daughter." "Not me, dude. You?"